It began on a quiet rotation cycle at the edge of regulated space, just past the mineral-rich expanse of Sector 19K deep-orbit scanners, normally used to track rogue comets and gravitational distortions, picked up something anomalous. A presence that wasn't there, then was, with no trace of entry or propulsion trail. A blip, a flicker, and then stability. The outpost on Relay Moon, Calexis 3, sent the first alert. It was routine. Anomalies happened, and usually turned out to be stray cargo or cloaked diplomatic vessels. But the reading didn't match any known vessel profile. Its mass was too large, its energy emissions too low. It just hung in space, perfectly still, as if waiting. By the time the Dominion Council's astrophysical network received the signal packet, the entire science division had gone silent. What they were looking at wasn't just unregistered, it was unclassified. The vessel measured over 12 kilometers long, shaped in long, deliberate lines, unlike any known starship design. Its hull shimmered in an irregular pattern, like light seen through a dense atmosphere. Nothing about it made sense. What set the alarms off wasn't its size or material composition, it was the way the ship simply appeared. No hyperlane disruption, no gravitational lensing, no ripple in quantum foam. One moment it wasn't there. The next moment it was, like the galaxy had always known it, and simply forgotten. Within 22 minutes, the first council-wide alert was issued. Civilian vessels were instructed to divert course. Observation posts were scrambled to red level, and cultural analysts were pulled from every major university. What was it? Where did it come from? And most importantly, why now? The ship transmitted a signal just one time. It was a clean, calm data stream, standard Dominion encoding, but in an Earth origin language not seen in Council space for over 8,000 galactic cycles. The message was simple. Earth envoy vessel, resolve, requesting peaceful observation. No territorial claim. No trade interest. No conflict intention. Awaiting response. The room of Dominion High Chancellor Elliot Noor grew still as the words were displayed on the central holopad. Earth. A name buried in speculative linguistics and fringe theory. No known race officially identified as human existed within registered territories, though there were dozens of folklore fragments mentioning a bipedal mammal species that evolved rapidly and unpredictably before disappearing from galactic relevance entirely. And now one of their ships had arrived, in silence, offering no harm, but bringing with it an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. What unsettled the Council most wasn't the scale of the ship, or even the audacity of its presence. It was the idea that somewhere, beyond the mapped edges of the galaxy, a species had quietly built something of this magnitude, without help, without trade, without invitation. And now they had shown up, not to announce themselves in thunder or fire, but to simply observe. To every species watching, that was the most chilling part. They didn't ask for permission. They simply were. Across the stars, scholars raced to uncover forgotten records. The name Earth became the most searched term in the Dominion knowledge net within hours. Archived expedition logs were reanalyzed. Obscure myths were dusted off. And slowly, a strange pattern emerged. Earth had not been completely unknown. It had been disregarded. Scattered across a dozen ancient cultures, fragments of stories mentioned a place of chaotic brilliance, a world of storms and sunlight, of creatures that shaped fire and metal before they understood harmony. Always at the edge of extinction, always adapting. Most dismissed those tales as primitive metaphor. Now, with the arrival of the vessel calling itself Resolve, those fragments started to form a shape, an outline of something very real. Even stranger was the linguistic footprint. The message from the vessel wasn't just in one language. It arrived in every language. Simultaneously, perfectly translated, even in dialects long considered extinct. That level of comprehension suggested a deep knowledge of the galaxy's cultural fabric, something that should have taken thousands of years to learn. But no known outposts, embassies, or scouting reports had ever recorded human contact. So how had they learned everything without ever being seen? The Council brought in the chrono-archivists, a cautious and secretive order that traced civilizations through temporal anomalies and forgotten data strands. After 2 cycles of review, they revealed a theory that chilled the room. According to subtle distortions in deep space timelines, humanity had once touched the stars, briefly and long ago. The surge of exploration, fast and reckless. But then, silence, as if the species had collapsed, hidden itself, or moved far beyond. Until now. Perhaps they didn't vanish, one archivist whispered. Perhaps they chose solitude. Meanwhile, automated analysis of the Resolve's construction began. The ship's hull included compounds only formed in the hearts of dying neutron stars. Its energy systems resembled nothing known, neither fusion nor antimatter-based, but something else entirely, self-regenerating and silent. It had no visible weapons, but enough structural reinforcement to enter a collapsing atmosphere unharmed. It was more fortress than ship, more ark than cruiser. It became clear this was not just a vessel. It was a statement. The Dominion media dubbed it the Ghost Titan. Diplomats scrambled to form a response, though no one knew what kind of reply would even be appropriate. What could one say to a civilization that had returned after eons of silence with a ship that could outlast stars? And all the while, the Resolve remained still. No new signals, no movement, just presence. It floated above a quiet moon in a forgotten system, outside major trade routes, doing nothing, and yet commanding more attention than any fleet or treaty in recent history. To the Dominion's oldest species, it felt like an echo of something ancient waking up again. To the youngest, it felt like a challenge, unspoken, but undeniable. The humans had returned, not with demands, not with fanfare, but with a calm, unsettling patience. And across the galaxy, one question refused to fade. If they had learned so much in silence, what else had they become? Days turned into weeks, and the Dominion's unease shifted from curiosity to deep, unsettling anxiety. The Resolve had remained in its stationary position, as if suspended in time. No approach was made. No communications followed. Its mere existence, hanging just beyond the known frontiers of space, became a silent weight on the minds of every civilization. There was no outward hostility, no overt signs of aggression. And yet that was what made it worse. The ship wasn't threatening in the way that one might expect a warship to be. It wasn't making any demands. It wasn't showing any force. It simply was. And that was terrifying. The Dominion, whose empire spanned across hundreds of star systems, had long established the rules of engagement with new species. Military power, diplomacy, and technological superiority were the core pillars of their system. New species were either assimilated or left alone, their intentions determined by a quick exchange of firepower or terms. But here, there was no exchange. No messages demanding anything. The human ship had come, simply present, in defiance of every established protocol. It wasn't just the ship itself, it was the entire concept behind it. The Resolve was built to withstand extremes. Intense radiation fields, the crushing pressures of collapsed stars, gravitational anomalies, and the vast void of deep space. Its design spoke to something else, something long lost or forgotten by the galaxy's other civilizations, an understanding of survival in its most elemental form. No known species built ships like this. The Dominion had perfected sleek, modular designs, able to serve as both fortress and embassy. The Volmeri, with their ancient organic vessels, controlled entire sectors through living technology. The Keruan, a species known for their engineering precision, crafted warships of terrifying beauty. But the Resolve, it was something else entirely. It was raw. It was made of materials that bent the fabric of space, a structure that could endure everything the cosmos could throw at it, as though it had been crafted by a civilization who had never depended on the luxury of predictability. There was something deliberate in its silence, its absence of engagement, that set it apart. Diplomats from the Aerovac system spoke of a hunger, a quiet yearning emanating from the ship, a curiosity that burned far beyond their understanding. Empathic species described the feeling as something like being watched by an ancient alien intelligence, its gaze not predatory, but possessive, as if the ship itself knew things the rest of the galaxy could not comprehend. "Perhaps they have seen the future," whispered one researcher, "or perhaps they have already lived it." The resolve remained steady and unmoving, as if it were waiting for something, but no one knew what. It didn't make itself available for meetings, nor did it share any more information. The galaxy's most advanced communication systems went quiet when they tried to reach out, the ship responding only with the same simple message. Earth envoy vessel, resolve requesting peaceful observation. Awaiting response. The more the galaxy thought about it, the more the resolve became something less than a ship, and more like a symbol. The perfect design, not of strength or terror, but of quiet endurance. A machine built to survive, to observe, to wait. And in that wait, it unnerved the galaxy. It wasn't the ship that terrified them. It was the fear of what it represented. A species that could exist without anyone knowing. A species that perhaps had mastered the art of survival in ways no one else could even begin to understand. A species that had come back not to conquer, but simply to observe, and to remind the galaxy that there was always more to learn. The days turned into weeks, then months, and the Dominion still had not responded. The resolve remained as it had always been, a massive, silent presence in the void of space, waiting. There was no aggression in its silence, no threat in its stillness. It did not demand attention. It simply existed, hanging in space like an enigma, and in that existence, it grew ever more unsettling. Across the galaxy, the reactions to the ship were split. Some saw it as an invitation, an opportunity for knowledge, a chance for the galaxy to expand its understanding of what lay beyond the boundaries of known space. Others, however, saw it as a challenge to everything they had built, an unknown civilization that refused to be defined by their rules, their treaties, or their power structures. A species that came, not to conquer, but simply to watch. Diplomatic efforts were made in earnest, but every attempt was met with the same quiet rejection. No hails, no messages. The resolve did not respond to any queries, be they from the Dominion or the smaller, more cautious species on the outer rim. It had not spoken since the first transmission, a single clear message sent on its arrival. Earth envoy vessel, resolve requesting peaceful observation. No territorial claim, no trade interest, no conflict intention, awaiting response. It was a message so simple, so direct, that it should have been reassuring. And yet it only deepened the fear. It was the absence of further communication that terrified the galaxy more than anything else. If they were truly peaceful, why did they remain so distant? If they were not a threat, why would they send such a colossal vessel to hover above a forgotten moon, without ever offering further explanation? Then, one day, it happened. A new signal arrived. This time, it was not a message, nor a voice, but an offering, a strange transmission that was both visual and sensory. The message was delivered through a frequency never used by the Dominion before. It was not words. It was a song. It started as an unassuming hum, low and resonant, vibrating through the deep space communications channels. Slowly, the hum became layered, filling with harmonies, rhythms, and melodies that were like nothing any species had ever heard. It was not a communication in any sense the galaxy was used to. It was not a threat, nor was it a plea for help. It was simply a song. The emotional impact was immediate. Even the most pragmatic species on the Council, known for their cold logic and reason, felt it. It was a sound that transcended language, that reached directly into the minds of those who heard it. A memory, a feeling, a presence. For some, it was nostalgic, a reminder of something long forgotten, perhaps of their own lost homes. For others, it was unsettling, as though it reached deep into the soul and stirred something primordial. As the song continued, a realization dawned across the council. The humans were not trying to communicate in the way the galaxy understood. They were offering a gesture, an invitation to connect, not with words, but with the most human of experiences, emotion, expression, and the shared language of existence. The song was a bridge, not of technology, but of humanity. It was a declaration that communication didn't have to be spoken to be understood. It was a reminder that the deepest connections between sentient beings were often built not on logic, but on shared understanding. Of the silence between words, the beauty of music, the weight of history. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the song ended. The resolve fell silent once more, its only message left hanging in the air, like the last note of a song played on a forgotten world. In that silence, the galaxy was left with one undeniable truth. The humans were here, not to dominate, not to conquer, but to offer themselves as they were. The silence, the song, the waiting, it was all part of their message. They had no agenda but to observe, to share, and to wait. And in the vast, infinite quiet of the cosmos, that might have been the most terrifying thing of all, the Dominion Council convened in an emergency session, a gathering that felt more like a tribunal than a diplomatic meeting. The resolve song still reverberated in the minds of every delegate, as unsettling as it was beautiful. No one could deny the sheer magnitude of what was happening. A ship of unimaginable size and unknown origin had arrived, offering nothing but silence and a single cryptic message. And now, after all the diplomatic efforts, the galaxy had been given a glimpse of humanity, through music, through emotion, through a depth of expression that many species found impossible to comprehend. For weeks, the Council had debated the ship's intentions. Was humanity a peaceful race, merely wishing to share knowledge, to observe? Or was this some elaborate game, a strategy to unbalance the galaxy, to force the Dominion into an untenable position? The overwhelming silence of the resolve only deepened the uncertainty. No demands had been made, but neither had any effort been made to reach out for formal communication. Instead, they had been left with an emotional experience, one that refused to be analyzed or understood in the usual ways. "I say we respond," Chancellor Elliot Noor said, breaking the tense silence that had descended upon the chamber. Her voice was calm but carried an unspoken urgency. "We must reach out to them, make contact in any way we can. We cannot let this continue indefinitely." Her words were met with nods from a few, but a majority hesitated. It wasn't that they were unwilling to engage. It was that the resolve had changed the very nature of the discussion. No longer were they debating military power or trade routes. This was about something deeper, something far more dangerous to their carefully constructed worldview. "But how do we communicate with them?" argued Jivak, a representative from the Aravak species. "The resolve does not conform to anything we understand. It is not a warship. It is not an embassy. It is a presence. How do we respond to an invitation that is not an invitation, to a gesture that is not a request?" The chamber fell into murmurs. For the first time, the Dominion Council felt the weight of their own ignorance. No one knew how to respond to a species that had chosen silence as its weapon of choice, and even more troubling was the song. It was not a message to decode, nor was it a signal with a clear purpose. It was simply there. An experience, not an exchange. "We cannot afford to ignore them," said Satar, a Volmeri diplomat who had remained strangely silent for much of the meeting. His voice was low but powerful. "But we must understand one thing. This ship is not here to ask questions. It is here to observe. And perhaps it is here to judge. Can we truly claim to know what they seek from us?" Satar's words hung in the air like a challenge. The other delegates shifted uncomfortably. The Volmeri, known for their organic and biotechnological prowess, rarely spoke without reason. Satar's caution was not unwarranted. The resolve did not play by the rules, did not show its hand. It wasn't a species that offered comfort, and it wasn't a race that would be easily understood. "Perhaps we've been looking at this all wrong," Chancellor Nor continued, her voice firm. What if humanity does not need us to respond? What if they're not waiting for us to speak, but to listen? That suggestion caused the room to fall into thoughtful silence. The idea was revolutionary, even disturbing. The humans had not come to negotiate. They had not come to demand anything. They had come to be witnessed. They had come to observe, not just their surroundings, but the galaxy itself. If humanity is truly as ancient as these records suggest, Nor added, then perhaps they know something we do not. Perhaps the question is not what we should say to them, but what we can learn by simply existing in their presence. The chamber grew quiet as the delegates pondered the implications. Humanity had come not to fit into the established order of the galaxy, but to challenge it. And in their quiet, relentless observation, they had revealed something the Dominion hadn't prepared for, a truth not of conquest or war, but of understanding. The debate continued late into the cycle, but one thing was certain. The resolve had already done its work. It had forced the galaxy to confront its own assumptions, to challenge the very nature of what it meant to be advanced, to be civilized. And the more the Council thought about it, the more they realized they might not be the ones in control anymore. The Dominion was a vast empire, known for its speed, efficiency, and power. It had forged its way through the stars by being decisive, by acting swiftly, crushing dissent, and shaping the galaxy to its will. Now, with the resolve hovering silently in the void, the galaxy's most powerful civilization found itself confronted by something that none of its strategies, doctrines, or calculations had prepared for. The weeks turned to months, and the Council had yet to make any definitive move. Every diplomatic suggestion had been met with careful, deliberate silence. Every probe, every new message sent to the resolve was ignored or returned with nothing more than the same calm words. Earth envoy vessel, resolve requesting peaceful observation. No territorial claim. No trade interest. No conflict intention. Awaiting response. It was maddening. The galaxy's most intelligent species had scored their records, consulted every expert, and exhausted their every diplomatic option. And still, the ship remained a riddle. The resolve had no demands, no requests, and no intentions other than to observe. It was an invitation, but not one that could be accepted on anyone's terms. The Dominion had always been a species of action. Their success had always hinged on their ability to act swiftly and with authority. And yet, the resolve's silence mocked that very nature. It forced them into a position they could neither control nor manipulate, waiting. And as time passed, that waiting became a test of patience. For the first time in millennia, the Dominion found itself unable to dictate the flow of events. It was a humbling realization, one that carried with it the bitter taste of helplessness. Even the most strategic minds within the Dominion could not figure out how to handle the ship's presence. Was it a threat? A test? A trap? As the silence stretched on, doubts began to creep into the hearts of the Council members. For all their accumulated knowledge and power, they had never encountered a race that preferred waiting to acting. In the vastness of space, where every star system had a purpose and every species had a goal, the humans seemed to have no purpose beyond simply being, and that alone was terrifying. Yet, the longer the resolve waited, the more the galaxy began to change. Unseen, unnoticed, the humans' arrival had begun to have its effect. Many of the smaller species, those who had once lived in the shadow of the Dominion's might, found themselves contemplating a different future, one where waiting, rather than immediate action, might hold the key to survival. Perhaps they thought it was time to listen rather than speak, to observe rather than demand. The resolve had shown them a new way of thinking, one that did not rely on power or speed, but on the strength of patience and the courage to remain silent in the face of uncertainty. But not everyone was so willing to adapt. Across the galaxy, smaller factions began to stir. Fear of the unknown, the fear that their place in the galaxy was slipping away, drove many to consider more drastic actions. Some believed that the human ship's silence was a passive form of manipulation, a way to break the will of those who hesitated. Others felt that the only way to regain control was to assert themselves, to show that they, too, could wait, but with purpose. In the corridors of the Dominion's capital, murmurs of rebellion began to grow. Political factions, once united under a common goal, now splintered into groups with conflicting visions of how to deal with the resolve. Some advocated for patience, while others demanded military intervention, convinced that the humans were biding their time for some catastrophic purpose. The test was no longer about answering the questions the resolve had posed. It was about answering the deeper, more existential question that it had forced upon them. How long could they continue to wait before the silence became unbearable? The tension had been building for months, but now it was finally spilling into action. The Dominion's political landscape was fracturing. Even though the resolve still remained silent, unmoving in the distant depths of space, it had managed to provoke more change than any fleet or empire could have. The galaxy was no longer the same as it had been before the human vessel arrived. Factional leaders within the Dominion grew restless. The once unified response to the resolve had become a battlefield of ideologies. Some factions, led by figures like Chancellor Nor, called for restraint and patience. They argued that the humans were a new kind of power, one that didn't need to dominate with weaponry or grandiosity. Instead, they used their silence as a force of influence. The resolve, in its stillness, had already altered the course of galactic politics. Others, however, were no longer willing to wait. To them, the silence of the resolve felt like an insult, a deliberate refusal to engage on the terms the Dominion had set for the galaxy. They had waited long enough. It was time to respond forcefully. As whispers of rebellion spread through the ranks of Dominion leadership, a faction of military commanders, backed by corporate interests, decided to take matters into their own hands. They feared that the more they waited, the more the humans would chip away at the foundation of galactic order. They feared the resolve was a harbinger of something far worse than anyone had anticipated. Without the approval of the Central Council, a fleet was assembled. Small but well-equipped, it was meant to send a message. The Dominion would not be intimidated by silence. A task force of warships, escorted by fleets of smaller vessels designed for rapid deployment, set course for the system housing the resolve. The mission was simple: approach the resolve, demand communication, and assert the might of the Dominion. As the fleet cruised toward its destination, their preparations were meticulous. The military officers had been trained to expect immediate conflict, a quick strike to force a response, a show of dominance. The resolve was no ordinary ship, but they believed that the only way to deal with the unknown was to confront it head-on. But as the fleet entered the system and the colossal shadow of the resolve loomed on the horizon, something unexpected happened. The approach did not provoke an immediate response. No weapons were fired. No alarms went off. The human ship did not even move. It merely watched them. This silence was different from before. Now, as the fleet drew closer, it felt suffocating. The resolve was not passive. It was studying them. Every move the Dominion fleet made, every shift in tactics, was being watched and analyzed. The ship's sensors began picking up strange readings. Energy fluctuations, changes in gravitational waves, as though the resolve was subtly interacting with the very fabric of space itself, measuring them, calculating them. The fleet hesitated. Something about the situation was wrong. The resolve wasn't just an observer. It was a mirror, reflecting back their every action and intention. The more they moved, the more they realized how ill-prepared they were for this kind of engagement. The task force commander, General Corrin, made a final decisive call. He ordered the fleet to stop and maintain a safe distance. His ship slowed, and a wave of doubt rippled through the ranks. They had come to force the issue, to break the silence, but now they were standing at the edge of a precipice. They had not expected the resolve to be this, alive in its silence. It was then that the ship's hull flickered, a pulse of light in the vast emptiness of space. Not a signal, not a message, but a simple acknowledgement. The pulse was faint, a soft glow against the endless dark. But to the Dominion fleet, it was an undeniable response. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a threat. But it was a sign that the humans were still there, still waiting. And that realization, that they had not been ignored but watched, stunned them. The ripple of their own actions had triggered a response, but it wasn't the confrontation they had anticipated. It was a reflection. And in that reflection, they saw something they hadn't wanted to acknowledge: their own vulnerability. As the fleet stood in orbit around the Resolve, General Corrin knew that the next step was not about action, but about understanding. The humans, it seemed, had come to test not their military power, but their resolve, their capacity to endure and reflect. And the Dominion's response had been to leap straight into the unknown, forcing them to confront what they feared most: the silence that held everything in place. The fleet hovered in tense silence, a heartbeat away from action, but trapped in an unfamiliar stillness. The pulse of light from the Resolve had shaken the Dominion task force, sending ripples of doubt through every ship. The response was not a threat. It was not an invitation. It was simply a signal, a reflection of their own intentions, cast back at them like a mirror. The moment stretched, and in that frozen instant, a realization settled over General Corrin. The humans were not playing the game the Dominion had prepared for. They had no intention of war, nor conquest, nor domination. They had come with something far more dangerous: an invitation to rethink everything the galaxy believed about power, influence, and survival. The fleet's commanders gathered in their ships' briefing rooms, but there was no rush to decide. They were no longer dealing with an enemy. They were dealing with a fundamental question: what would happen if they stopped fighting and started listening? Back at the Dominion capital, the political rift had only grown wider. Factions were at a breaking point, some arguing for war, others for peace, and still others for a retreat to neutral ground. The human presence had fractured the confidence of the Dominion leadership. The more they debated, the more they realized how little they truly knew. The Resolve had turned the entire galaxy's assumptions on their head. There was no protocol for this kind of engagement, no blueprint for how to handle a species that preferred patience to action, silence to speech. The time for diplomacy seemed to be slipping away, but the message from the Resolve was clear. It was not the humans who would bend to the galaxy's rules. It was the galaxy that was being tested. General Corrin stood before the fleet's command holograph, looking out toward the Resolve, which still hung unmoving in the void, its massive frame a silent observer. The urge to act, to force something to happen, was growing stronger. But deep down, Corrin understood that any move he made now would be a direct response to human tactics, not Dominion ones. He made a final, bold decision. "We'll turn around," he said firmly, looking at his officers. "We will withdraw." The words were met with shocked silence. The generals had come prepared for war, not retreat. But General Corrin's reasoning was sound. In that quiet, unyielding presence of the Resolve, the Dominion had been given something more powerful than a battle: the choice of how to respond. If they could not force a response, they could at least decide how to move forward. Without fanfare, the fleet turned. They didn't retreat in fear. They withdrew with intent, as though acknowledging that sometimes the greatest act of power was knowing when to stop fighting. As the ship shifted course, another pulse of light, slightly brighter this time, emerged from the Resolve. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a declaration. It was simply another signal. Understood. The Dominion fleet vanished into the distance, leaving behind a galaxy it had been irrevocably changed. There were no grand speeches or proclamations. There was no great victory or defeat. Only the quiet, resounding truth that had been whispered across the stars by the humans. Sometimes, to conquer a galaxy, one need only wait. Back on the Dominion homeworld, the Council sat in stunned silence. The fleet had returned, but the battle had not been fought. The Resolve had done something no military force ever could. It had shown them that silence, when wielded with purpose, was as powerful as any weapon. The Dominion was no longer the unquestioned authority in the galaxy. It had been forced to look inward, to confront its own arrogance and assumptions. Humanity, through their ship and their patient observation, had delivered a message that no one would ever forget. They had come not with a sword, but with a mirror. And in that mirror, the galaxy had seen itself, not as conquerors, but as beings. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. The humans had shown the galaxy that sometimes, to truly understand another, one must first learn to listen. And in that lesson, the galaxy had learned to fear not what humanity would do, but what they could become.